You met someone last week, maybe at a party, maybe at work, maybe on the street. You talked for a few minutes, and by the time you walked away, you had already decided whether you liked them, whether you trusted them, and whether you wanted to see them again. You made all three decisions before you were even aware you were making them. Most people assume first impressions are about content, what you say, how you present yourself, whether the conversation flows. The research suggests that by the time content enters the picture, the most important decisions have already been made. The brain doesn't wait for evidence. It builds a verdict first and looks for confirmation second. The 4-minute window is not arbitrary. It comes from a body of research into what psychologists call thin slicing, the brain's ability to extract accurate information from very small samples of behavior. The term was formalized by Nalini Ambady at Harvard, whose work in the 1990s and early 2000s produced findings that made her colleagues deeply uncomfortable. In one study, Ambady gave participants 30-second silent video clips of professors they had never met. Participants rated each professor on 13 different traits: warmth, competence, confidence, honesty. When researchers compared those ratings to the professors' end-of-year evaluations from students who had spent an entire semester with them, the correlation was nearly perfect. 30 seconds of silent video predicted a semester of real interaction with almost no error. Then Ambady cut the clips to 15 seconds. The accuracy held. Then to 6 seconds. It still held. The brain was extracting something real from almost nothing. Not guessing, not projecting, reading. The question is, what it's reading. And the answer is not what most people expect. Within the first 4 minutes of meeting someone, your brain is processing information across at least 5 distinct channels simultaneously. Most of them have nothing to do with language. The first channel is posture and movement. Before a single word is spoken, your brain has already cataloged how the other person holds their body, how they move through space, how they orient toward you. Research by Mehrabian at UCLA found that body language accounts for a disproportionate share of the information people extract in social encounters. The specific numbers have been misquoted for decades, but the underlying finding is solid. The body communicates before the mouth does, and the body is harder to control. The second channel is eye contact. Not whether someone makes it, but how. The duration, the quality, the moment it breaks, and where it goes when it does. Sustained eye contact that doesn't accompany aggression reads as interest or dominance depending on the surrounding context. Gaze aversion at specific moments, when answering a question, when making a claim, is processed by the brain as a social signal with weight. People are not consciously analyzing this. The processing happens below the level of awareness and surfaces as a feeling. Something about this person feels off, or something about them feels right. The feeling is the output of a calculation the conscious mind never sees. The third channel is voice, not the words. The prosody, the rhythm, the pitch variation, the pace, the texture. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people could assess traits like dominance, warmth, and trustworthiness from voice samples with their eyes closed and the words made unintelligible, the content removed entirely. What remained was enough. The voice carries information the speaker is often unaware of transmitting. Stress changes it. Deception changes it. Genuine interest changes it in ways that are measurable and that other people detect without knowing they're detecting anything at all. The fourth channel is smell. This one makes people uncomfortable because it implies something about human behavior that we prefer not to think about. But the research is consistent and has been replicated across multiple cultures. Humans assess genetic compatibility, immune system variation, and hormonal state through olfactory signals, not consciously. The processing is entirely subcortical. It happens in regions of the brain that predate language, predate conscious thought, predate almost everything we think of as specifically human. You cannot decide not to be affected by someone's scent. The evaluation happens before the decision to evaluate exists. The fifth channel is microexpressions, flashes of genuine emotion that cross the face in less than a quarter of a second before the social mask reassembles. Paul Ekman at the University of California spent decades documenting these expressions and found them to be universal across cultures. The same configurations of muscle movement expressing the same emotional states in faces from New York to Papua New Guinea. Most people cannot consciously identify microexpressions, but most people respond to them. The brain registers the flash and files it as information about the person's internal state, information that often contradicts what their words and controlled expressions are communicating. What this adds up to is a system of extraordinary sophistication, running entirely outside conscious awareness during the first 4 minutes of every social encounter. By the time you have exchanged names, your brain has already processed the other person's body language, eye behavior, vocal qualities, scent profile, and emotional microexpressions, and synthesized all of it into something that feels like intuition but is actually the output of a parallel processing system that evolution spent millions of years refining. The uncomfortable implication is that the conversation you think you're having during those 4 minutes is not the conversation that matters. The conversation that matters is happening in channels you cannot access, cannot control, and cannot override with effort or intention. This is why first impressions are so difficult to change. Not because people are rigid or unfair, because the data the brain collected in those first 4 minutes came from channels that don't lie the way language does. The body leaked, the voice changed, the face flashed something real for a fraction of a second, and the brain logged it. Subsequent information gets processed against that initial model. Evidence that confirms that passes through easily. Evidence that contradicts it gets scrutinized, explained away, or simply weighted less. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but in the context of first impressions, it functions more like an immune system. The brain built a model, it defends the model. Changing it requires not just new information, but enough new information delivered consistently enough over enough time to overwhelm the original filing. The research does not say the system is perfect. Thin slicing is accurate on average across populations. For any individual encounter, the brain can be wrong. It can be fooled by someone who has learned to control their body language and voice. It can be biased by context, by mood, by who the new person reminds you of. The system was built for an environment very different from the one most people now navigate. But the research also does not say you can opt out. The 4-minute window opens the moment two people enter the same space. The processing begins before either of them decides to begin it, and by the time the conversation ends, the verdicts are already in. You met someone last week. You made 3 decisions about them before you were aware you were deciding anything. The question worth sitting with is whether they made the same decisions about you.